Okay, so we are in Matthew chapter 25. If you're visiting with us, welcome. We have been studying the parables of Jesus, and today we're going to be talking about the parable of the talents. So Matthew 25, beginning in verse 14. And as we've started doing here from the beginning, trying to kind of take a look, for those of you that read ahead and have some thoughts on this already, kind of characterizing these parables as we go through. Any initial thoughts on the parable of the talents before we move forward on where this would fall? In the surprise of God's kingdom, God's upside down kingdom, or the kingdom requires a decision. Any immediate thoughts jump out at you? What'd you say? Decision. Okay, we got number 3. See some nodding for number 3. Anything else? Got to be some dissension here for it to be interesting. Nobody? I will say, well, so as with all of these, you could make an argument for a lot of these. I will say, as we move into kind of the context of what's happening, well, let me just start there. We're in chapter 25 of Matthew. Going back to chapter 24, in these few chapters here, what's going on at this time? What's going on with Jesus? Where are they at? What's happening? Anybody set the stage for me? Okay. Yes. So time frame wise, this is the last week. This is Jesus in Jerusalem. We've talked about some of these parables. He's up in Galilee. Some of the parables, he's on his way to Jerusalem. This is the last week, his final week. He's in Jerusalem. And actually, at the beginning of chapter 24, we read that he leaves the temple. He's leaving the temple for the very last time. And he's heading to the Mount of Olives. And we're going to talk about that too. So that's kind of the location for where this conversation, this discourse, if you will, it's also referred to as the Olivet Discourse because of its location. That's where it takes place. And we'll take a look at where that locale is and everything. So it's Jesus' last week. He's just left the temple. He's talking specifically to whom in 24 and particularly 25. Who's he talking with? I hear his disciples, yes, his disciples. And we see a lot of the language, and you look back in 24, and then you look at some of the parables in 25, you see a lot of, 24 specifically talks about the end of days. It talks about the destruction of Jerusalem. You get into, at the end of 24, beginning in verse 45, there's this, what I'll refer to as a parable. We don't always think of it as one, but kind of this wicked servant. Then we get into chapter 25, the parable of the virgins, and then we get into this parable of the talents. All of those kind of focus on this idea of readiness. And so there's a lot of this language of the end is coming, as Jesus is getting ready for his life on earth to end as well. It's preparation, it's readiness, and it's all kind of approached from a slightly different perspective. So, as we mentioned, this is... obviously, it's Jerusalem. You can see the temple there. It's kind of, so north is up, south is down. And so what you see over to the east is, in the big circle that I've drawn there, is the area of, you see this Mount of Olives, which is kind of faint, and then right next to it there is actually the Garden of Gethsemane. So in this path, you see, we read about Jesus traveling this path from Jerusalem over to Bethany. What is that, about a couple miles maybe, something like that in distance. And so what you would have seen, this is from Jerusalem looking toward the Mount of Olives. And actually, if you look, you go down to this valley, and then there's a building there down in the valley right in front of that road. That actually begins a little area that actually is the Garden of Gethsemane. And then you go up into the hills there, into the Mount of Olives. So somewhere in that location is where this conversation, this discourse would have been. And we read about Jesus going and sitting at the Mount of Olives in some location. It's possible that the Garden of Gethsemane might technically be considered part of that. It's at the foot of it. but just interesting nonetheless. So Jesus is leaving Jerusalem and he's heading to this location. So now that we kind of know what's going on, let's get into our text this morning. So Matthew chapter 25. We're going to break this up a little bit, and we'll start reading verses 14 through 18. Matthew 25, 14 through 18, and we'll make some comments on this specific section. So, for it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted them to his property. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away. He who had received the 5 talents went at once, traded with them, and he made 5 talents more. So also he who had the 2 talents made 2 talents more. But he who had received the 1 talent went and dug in the ground and hid his master's money. So, in doing some digging, one of the things that I found out was that the Greek word for talent here, although it does talk about giving to their abilities, the actual talent itself comes from a Greek word, talenton, which I'm probably not pronouncing correctly, but that was actually a unit of weight. It wasn't a monetary, this is kind of a unit of coinage. It was a unit of weight, not a specific currency, and really the value depended on what it was made of, whether it was gold, silver, copper. Could have been made of several different things. But it had the potential to be equivalent to about 6,000 denarii. You remember what we said, like 1 denarius represented? A day's wage for an average day labor, a day's wage. So 6,000 denarii, potentially 20 years of wages for the average day labor, which is interesting. So what we're talking about, a significant amount of money here. Even for the 1 talent, significant money. What are your thoughts on this section so far? Any takeaways? Anything that jumps out at you? What's that? I'm sorry. Okay, and it says kind of right away, right? Once he gave it to them, they went away at once, traded, and they got more. They all received some. All the servants that we read about here received something. Anything else? Yeah, that's interesting. What's that? What's their ability based on? I guess he knows them. I think that's what we can derive that at least. The master knows his servants, right? Yeah. Dan? That he could, yeah. He still gets something, and there's still something expected. Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, how many of you that in the workforce, I mean, let's be candid, there are people that you would trust more with than others, right? There are some that you say, okay, this person, I know what they're capable of. I'm going to put them in charge of this task. This person, I don't want to put them in front of a client. They're not the best communicate. They're just not the right person for this job, right? We all have different abilities. We can relate to that in the workplace. We can relate to that in our everyday lives. Everybody's not the same. And he's recognizing this, the master and the servants. My servants are not all cut from the same cloth. They're all unique. They're individuals. And I think this recognizes that God views us as individuals whose circumstances and personalities differ as well, which is important. He knows us individually. Yep. and almost diminish it to the point like it's okay if he loses it. It's just one, right? It's not that big deal. We don't expect much of him. If he blows it, I'm kind of expecting him to blow it. It's okay. But to your point, yeah, this was valuable. The master entrusted it to him. The master expected something back. Yeah. It's a lot of money. Anything else from this section? Okay, we'll continue. Yes, Valerie. I think so. The talents, they don't represent necessarily individual abilities. I think the master was consigning his money to his servants based on the skills, yes, that he knew his servants already possessed. The talent itself was an actual unit of measure. It was actually monetarily valuable. But he gave it to them. What gets confusing is because we think of the word talents and we think of abilities, and the text also refers to their abilities, right? They're kind of two separate things here. And we tend to think as soon as we hear talents, we think of our own talents, right? That's a good question. Yeah. What was the expectation? Yeah. I want to answer that because I think it's a good question. Let me answer that. Let's read this next section and talk about that. Because I don't know if we know for sure, but I have some thoughts. Yeah. So let's jump into verse 19 here, and we'll read 19 through 23. Now, after a long time, the master of those servants came and settled accounts with them. And he who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 talents more, saying, Master, you delivered to me 5 talents. Here, I have made 5 talents more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. And he also, who had the 2 talents, came forward, saying, Master, you delivered to me 2 talents. Here, I have made you 2 talents more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. What jumps out about this section? He had an expectation, and they fulfilled that expectation. So I would say accruing a profit wasn't just an unexpected bonus for the master. I think it seems like it was something that was intended from the start, to be wise with what they'd been given. And in being wise, given the abilities that they had, that would lend themselves to this profit, right? So I think what their response, what they produced, was exactly what the master had expected of them. More, right? Not just, and I think that even plays itself out more when we talk about the person with the 1 talent. Yeah. 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 It wasn't just safeguard it for me, be a safe for me. Yeah. What else about this section? Yeah. Okay. So he had multiple servants. He could have just recognized who was the A student, right, and said, I'm going all in with you. do something great with this. It wasn't all just about the profit. Um, he wanted to see how his servants responded to what they were given. And I think it demonstrates they had an obligation to have some sort of return. Anything else? Bill? Yeah. We think of like a few days, right? Sometimes when you first read this, like, I'll be back at the end of the week, see what you can do with it. See years, possibly, yeah. I mean, substantial amount of time. It says a long time. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, that's a good point. So what he said was, whether it was 5 or 2, they got the exact same reward, right? They got the exact same praise, and they got the exact same reward. Anything else? Yes, sir. Sometimes you give to those that you want to grow, to develop. Yeah, yeah. It's a good point. So his point was sometimes you don't always give it to people that really have the ability. You want to help them grow that ability as well. You want to help them develop. Maybe this was an opportunity for the person with 1 to step up and see what they could do. Yep. Anything else? Okay, moving on. Verse 24. And we come to the 1 talent man. He also, who had received the 1 talent, came forward, saying, Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow and gathering where you scattered no seed. So I was afraid, and I went and I hid your talent in the ground. Here, you have what is yours. But his master answered him, You wicked and slothful servant, you knew that I reap where I have not sown and gather where I scattered no seed. Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and at my coming I should have received what was my own with interest. So he shows no profit. And who does he actually blame for that? Huh? The master. He blames the master. He characterizes him as kind of this tough and capricious man that is very, arbitrarily, you reap where you don't sow. He puts it on him, and then he justifies his inactivity based on what? He was afraid. He was fearful. I would say he didn't want to risk losing it. He had 1. He didn't want to risk losing it all. So I think one way we would say he played it safe, right? I'm gonna find a place. I'm gonna bury it, keep it safe. Don't want to take any risks here. My master, he's a stern man. I'm gonna give him back what he gave me. We'll call it even. Would you categorize him as, or characterize him as, like, deliberately evil? How would you characterize him? Huh? Wimpy? I like that. Risk averse? He's definitely he is. He's lazy. Yeah. He's called wicked and lazy. The Greek word okneros means to be idle, reluctant, hesitant. That describes him. Dan, what were you going to say? And that's again, we go back to, a long time. He had a long time, right? I think, I don't know this for sure, so if anybody has any additional information, feel free to share. But like the ones that turned profit, I think a lot of it came from trading that occurred, whether it was materials that they had and kind of traded up, right, over a long period of time. You making good investments, you make good trades, you get back some more after a long period of time. And he just was fearful. He was lazy. The text calls him even wicked. Mike? Yeah. Wicked and lazy. Wicked's the worst. And I think he even, I think we add one more here. Let me finish this up here. So take the talent from him, give it to him who has the 10 talents. For to everyone who has more, for everyone who has will more be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who has not even what he has will be taken away. Even what he has will be taken away. And cast the worthless servant into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So we had a third element. He's called worthless. He's of no use. Unprofitable. Good question. Good question. So that segues right into the next section. Yeah. So step back, big picture. Again, it's very easy to kind of, when you're looking at these parables, go line by line and analyze and overanalyze, quite honestly, what this is supposed to mean. Step back. This isn't something that actually happened. It's a story that Jesus told to illustrate a purpose to his disciples. What's the big picture here? What's the lesson for his disciples, for us? Mike? Yeah. Personal responsibility and judgment. Who said that? He didn't grow. He didn't develop. He didn't, yeah. Yeah, I think so. So yes, Pam, I want to get into that a little bit. As I mentioned, this is really the third in a series of almost consecutive parables that, and in the previous parable that we're actually going to study a little bit later on the 10 virgins, points to the need for this watchfulness idea. This one shows that watchfulness is not passive waiting, it's active responsibility. Mary? They emptied themselves. There's nothing. Yeah. You don't want to leave anything on the table. So what are you connecting there, Mike? What do you? Yeah. So yeah. So Mike's point is it was the master that judged, right? It wasn't the two. And you almost want to lump. I almost want to lump. This is really kind of a three-character story. It's the master, it's the good servants, and it's the wicked servant, right? And so to Mike's point, it wasn't the good servants judging the wicked one. That job was reserved for the master, right? Yep. Um, so I think, yes, I think this is a lot about using what we have. I think it's identifying what we have. Christ doesn't assign to everyone the same responsibilities, but he does expect everyone to take advantage of the opportunities that we have. Aaron and I were just talking about this before. Sometimes this can be hard to try and maintain a humble heart, but also recognize I have this ability and I need to use it. I need to be active with it. It's God-given. It's not an excuse. Humility is not an excuse to kind of shrink from, or again, as this servant did, just kind of act passively and sit back and wait. Some of us have great abilities to lead. Others have, they can empathize. They can form relationships really well. Some of us are just born almost with this servant's heart. Some of us have to work on that a little bit more. And so they're varying degrees. They're different expectations for all of us, but acting on those abilities is required. I mean, I think of those of you that have kids, you think back to your kids. If they played the same sport together, I'm sure your kids have varying abilities. And you picture one that's just a fantastic athlete running up and down the field. Picture another that just wants to participate, but they're chasing butterflies or whatever. Do you have the same criteria by which you judge them at the end of it all? Well, I don't want both of them, if we're talking about soccer, to score. They both have to score 5 goals. But I do have a standard in terms of effort. Overall, there's a standard I have for them, but they have different abilities. So what I'm expecting from them in terms of output is going to be different. Same thing with kids in achievement in school. Some kids breeze through A's and they don't have to put in a lot of work, and some just are putting in night after night, and they're struggling to make C's, to make B's. We can find comps throughout our life. Okay? And this is tough, right? This is self-reflection, self-evaluation. It's tough because in our minds we want to quantify it, or we want to be able to say objectively, like, I have this ability, that means that equals I have to do this. And once I achieve that, great. And so I think for us there's value in always feeling like we can do more. Now, that would drive you crazy and wear you down because you just run with it. I know you. But being able to self-reflect and say, there's really more I can do. I've been blessed in this way. Am I using what God's given me? Dan and then Scott. Yep. Yeah, and so that, yeah. So I don't answer your question. I don't know. I don't know if that is a true, like, we're looking at this in one couple different ways: the master and the servant, and then we're also thinking about us and God, right? Um, I don't know if that's meant to imply an attitude we would take before God. Maybe. I actually hadn't given that a lot of thought. I think on that some more. I'm scared. Yeah, I'm scared. I'm scared of hell. I'm scared of. You're an all-powerful God. Um, I became a Christian. I don't want to mess that up. I'm just gonna kind of stay in my lane. Maybe. I don't know. Maybe. Yeah. Maybe. I gotta think about that some more. Right. Yeah. If you knew that he uses it against him, that's exactly right. Yeah. You should have at least. He throws it right back, and you're exactly right, Annette. Yeah. Mike. Yeah. Scott. Yeah. Yeah. And Jesus has to develop him too. David. think in this application, yeah, and going back to Scott's point too, because that, I would say to some extent maybe that happened where they went out, they preached, they taught, they spread the word, didn't get anything back, right? But it's the action, and to Scott's point, maybe somebody else reaped what they sowed, even though they didn't get anything initially from it. Valerie? Yeah, I would say yes. I think in our lives we can make that application where we don't have the confidence to utilize something that we have. I think in the context of the apostles going out, Christ had been developing them the whole way along. So I don't know if they really didn't have the excuse to kind of shirk. And maybe if they did, Jesus was giving them one last push here, like, no, I need you here. But I think for us, I think sometimes that can hinder us personally, the lack of confidence. Yeah, absolutely. And so kind of this idea, if you've been in this class, going back to the beginning, the idea is when we look at all these parables, which servant, which soil, which laborer, which the Pharisee or tax collector, which one are we? And it's not just always a one shot, like, oh, I'm this. We've talked about how the soils, the hearts change, right? And at different points in our life, we might have been, might have been more like this servant, but now I'm kind of over here. So again, I think one of the really beneficial pieces of this is evaluating these from a perspective of, while we initially read these and assume we're on the good side, we're the good soil, we're the good servant, we're the, all that, maybe we're not. And I would argue that probably very few of us are that good soil, that good servant our entire lives. I think we kind of go through times in our lives, we go through moments where we need to be challenged. And so I think that's, again, why these parables continue to be beneficial to us. Pam, last comment. Demands the kind of service that produces results. Christ expects results of us. We need to evaluate what it is, what those results look like, how we measure that ourselves. That's kind of up to us to think through and see what we can do. But do you have a point, Mike? Others. Yeah. Good point. I thought about that when Scott was talking. Yeah, absolutely. Good point. Thank you all very much for your attention, for your comments. Next week, a collection. This is a longer reading here, Matthew 13, 24 through 52. This is a collection of kind of mini parables, if you will, that all focus on the kingdom specifically. So that'll be our lesson for next week. Thank you.